Hello, everybody. A first question I have is, how could we better value the specific and unique skills of underrepresented individuals in audio?
Well, I think if we provide support and mentors that look like and are like the people coming up in the next generation, I think that would be extremely helpful, and that'll let them know that their skills are valued and that they have a voice at the table.
I think similarly to that, there's something about just reframing what we consider to be like viable performances of audio prowess to encapsulate also performances that are not masculinely normative, I guess. Um,
And is it also about the type of activities that people do, or is it?
Yeah, I mean, one of the, part of the sort of hidden history of audio, of course, is how many women have been working in it. They've just been in non-visible, non-public occupations, and their work is often denigrated as unskilled labor because they work in assembly or in component manufacture, even though it often requires decades of skill to be able to do that exceptionally well. So we should examine why those trades are kept invisible and not valued to the same extent as the sort of invention narratives that we tend to hear a lot more about at the AES technical shows.
I mean, I think that there's something around like how the boundaries of what is or is not considered audio engineering are defined that leaves out a lot of specific skills that are not necessarily always recognized as super critical for working in audio, but are actually sort of fundamental. Um, some of those being like uh, generating a feeling of trust and of support within the studio, or um, being able to work easily with others. I mean, yeah, so maybe placing a little more value on those skills as well.
And I guess I just add to that, Grace, that those are valuable skills for everyone. So if we're in education and we're talking about teens or higher education, we'd like young men to value and exhibit those same skills as well. At the same time that we want there to be appropriate or proportionate representation of all genders and gender identifying people in audio.
Is linked to the perceived kind of people that have these skills. So you say, we would like everybody to be empathetic and understanding and able to work with other people and so forth. But a lot of it, the sort of learning of those skills gets quite bypassed for young men. A lot of the time, they don't necessarily have the space or the societal expectation that they need to learn these skills. And I know some stuff looking at the way that quote unquote audio engineering is perceived, at least in UK schools where I'm from. You get this really mixed understanding of what audio engineering is and what the tasks are, and everybody from, depending on whether you ask a music student or a hardcore techie, what is music technology, what is audio engineering, that you get a huge range of answers in terms of what they understand the jobs to be. And as soon as you start introducing more of the creative problem-solving people skills, you immediately get more girls interested. As soon as you start, showing that you can have fun and solve problems and help people, completely different set of people interested. To you get to make things or break things, or the sort of hardcore technical skills, and it's really stuck in terms of how these subjects are described and how they are presented, as well as things with advertising and things with equipment, but also the skills that are kind of described as useful to these jobs, I think needs untangling and sort of retangling in a much nicer, cohesive way.
Yeah, and I think based on my research, like women performed much better at the soft skills, and those soft skills really innovate more creativity, which seems to totally make sense in a creative environment. So I think more of that should be encouraged, both for males and females and non-gender conforming people, that, we all bring our own lens, our own creativity to the process, and that broadens the field for everyone. So everybody benefits from that. So I believe it being more welcoming of different voices is really important.
I think that leads us also into our second question really smoothly, which is how can we value these abilities to elect emotions and facilitate the creative process, as opposed to simply relying on demonstrations of masculinity or toxic masculinity, or even technical prowess in the studio. Um,
Yeah, that's kind of interesting topic because I see that this is valued actually, meaning that a lot of masterclass professors will talk about that importance of eliciting emotions, catching a vibe, etc. And then it's not exactly what is valued. Then there's this assertiveness and having the right physical gestures, things like that, knowing how to roll cables a certain way, a certain way to talk about gear as well. So, yeah, how can we change this?
Oh, I'm just thinking about, some of the analogies that people use for the studio. I think Elliot was speaking about this earlier, and Amandine as well. Um, the bunker, right? So these become tropes, and they become binary and polarizing, and perhaps we can add some nuance to create a more ideal ground for the skills that we want to see in the studio, not just in the recording studio, but in other facets of audio as well. But using the studio as an example, the bunker versus what the Amandine mentioned, like being taught to think like you're a midwife, which actually right there there's quite a bit of gendering involved in those terms. But maybe we don't want to. Maybe no one, women or men, wants to be at battle every time they're going to create music. Maybe that's not good for anyone. So maybe we should be thinking about the kinds of skills that the therapists have, the mental health therapists and counselors and social workers have. Those are valuable in a creative setting as well. Facilitation skills. And actually, it's pretty broad when you start thinking about creative, musical, artistic skills, technical engineering skills, but also these soft skills of bringing people together, supporting them, getting them to build their greatest, bring out their strengths, making them feel confident, supported. It's a lot, but I think it's a better way to frame it than the binary of, or someplace as scary as a bunker during wartime.
Yeah, and I wanted to piggyback on that, Daniel, about the body-centered modalities and therapies, because things like being at war, being in a bunker are very constricting or intend to be trapped in the body. And if you think about it, our ilk of audio engineers, we're not a very healthy group. So, maybe we should be thinking about these softer skills and embodying our emotions and recognizing our emotions and how they affect other people as well as ourselves. Because if we're projecting, negative information out, it's not only hurting the person it's directed at, it's also hurting the person who is emitting it.
Absolutely. That just piggybacking on that, Mary, is I always think about the Simon Cowell, the stereotype of Simon Cowell, and you can run with that. I'd rather have a rusty screwdriver stabbed in my ear than listen to this song ever again. Like that kind of angsty, angry, hypercritical, non-supportive vibe doesn't feel good to be that person, just as much as it doesn't feel good to be in the room with that person.
Mm-hmm. That's true too. And artists too, creators, we're all very vulnerable, really. And I'm wondering if, like, many of us put up these masks or these walls to kind of hide that vulnerability, because no matter who you are, if you're in this industry, you're a creative person, and that creativity, there's a vulnerability. So how do we create like a safe space to express that? Because then that's where we get really great art.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, my sense from kind of looking at the sort of trajectory of technology development is that the sort of aspects of technology that get framed as an arsenal of weapons and secret weapons to use, again, these battle metaphors to be used ostensibly in bunkers rather than in wombs or nurturing studios. I mean, that makes sense if the goal is to create aggressive music strictly. And however, as we know, there's a lot of different kinds of music, and that's not the kind of energy you want in a lot of music productions, nor is the kind of music that most people want to hear. So there needs to be a bit of a balance between that and other kinds of technologies which are framed in such a way that they make their users feel have different emotional affective states when they go into a production process. So it's become so skewed, particularly in places, as I talked about in Gearslutz and other sort of sites where this stuff gets amped up. It's gotten way unbalanced towards that, and we need a contrasting set of tools that are useful for a wider range of things.
Yeah, I think emotional literacy is important, and those kinds of aggressive music, I don't think are a bad thing either, because it's a way of discharging that kind of energy, mm-hmm. and doing it so in a creative process.
Yeah, I remember having a professor who criticized the fact that during a session I told the musicians, "Oh, wait a sec, I'm just going to check something." And I just wanted to re-listen something to make sure everything was correct. I don't remember exactly the context, but anyway, and the prof told me after, no, never do that. You should never have any doubt in front of the musicians or in front of the clients. You need to be extremely self-confident, and everything needs to work even if it doesn't work. And I was just like, well, I just want to make sure we have it, like it's recorded and it's good. So I think there's something about this technology that we use that, we have to be full in control, and we have to be like almost like the human version of that technology, right? Which is, it's very powerful, and it's almost like you can't really be sensitive or like have the right for a mistake or have the right to have to double check something, because you never know. At least you should never say it. So I think that's an interesting relationship between this technology and the way we are taught to act in the studio. And I think the talks that Elliot gave raise awareness about that, and I'm starting understanding this relationship.
Also, that particular attitude of, oh, you just have to plow on ahead without taking the time to make sure that actually you have everything you need. I mean, it really like also speaks with the like, let's fix it in the mix attitude of like fixing everything in post-production rather than like taking the time. Like, and then that's also very much tied to like the idea that technology can fix everything. Technology is going to, like, you have this powerful technology that you can use to transform even the most poorly recorded thing into a hit, So, I mean, those concepts are also kind of linked. I was thinking also about Doug Bielmeyer's work on the skills that new audio engineer hires have. He's done some work where he surveyed employers of young graduates, and across the board, they said that really what the young graduates were missing was the capacity to work with and collaborate with musicians, where they had the technical skills, but they were missing those soft skills that we're talking about. So it's clear that they're not being valued enough within education. And I think just from like a bottom line business standpoint, like pivoting to talk about those things is going to relieve some of that like lack in people who are just graduating.
And this is great. This is great to hear, Grace. It's because I think it makes me think of that saying. Maybe somebody can finish it for me. A rising tide. How does it go? A rising tide raises all boats. Is that how it goes? Mm-hmm. Anyone ever heard that?
I think so.
Right. And I think what we're basically saying is here that a lot of these skills that we want to see valued are associated, are gendered, right? But they shouldn't be. And so by valuing these skills, we will ideally would lead towards better proportional representation of women and other groups in audio, but also everyone becomes better as a result. The whole industry just becomes better as a result of valuing these skills. And I also was thinking about my work with teens. So when I teach teenagers live sound, for example, I always tell them, look, the technical stuff, like if you forget, what a direct box does, that's fine. You can ask me later. You can ask me on the gig when you're shadowing me. It's not a big deal. But we'll spend time in class learning how to step on stage and shake the hand of the band leader and introduce yourself and make eye contact and ask them if they need anything and tell them what you're there to do that day. And because that's quite a bit more important. At some point, they do need to know what the direct box does.
Yeah, and I think that rapport really builds trust amongst all parties involved in the recording process. And that's not something I was taught necessarily coming up. And it was more like to be invisible in the whole thing. So it's just feeding that gender invisibility, that differing, that other. So yeah, I think we need to find ways of teaching more of these soft skills in our programs.
In the talks of Katz and Elliot, they show that changing the culture of a field depends on changing the gear culture. And what do you think, what kind of incentives could AES or other professional audio organizations come up with to motivate sponsors to hire more women and gender non-conforming people in leadership and technical positions? Also to choose alternatives to forums like Gearschlutz to market their new products? Do you have ideas about that?
Well, I think a lot of gear manufacturers are ignoring like 50% of the market. Women make up 50% approximately of the world population. That's a whole new market in audio. That's more revenue. It would benefit everybody to do that, I think.
You get a really interesting, there's been some somewhat notorious examples of gear companies realizing this and going, oh yeah, we should make women versions of our products, which, as you can imagine, goes really well. And it's, sometimes it is just we've put a pink faceplate on it. Sometimes it is the way that they've worded the press release. And it's a sort of, you can appreciate, I guess, a little bit that they're trying, but it's completely misses the mark. And you can tell that somebody somewhere has said, oh, we need to try and appeal to this other half of the market, but they're not asked any of the other half of the market. You have to involve people, and there has to be that incentive to involve people, and they have to be there in the company in the first place. It's this problem of we have a very limited pool of people in terms of the diversity of the people that we have. And if the people aren't in the pool, you can't improve the rest of the stuff. For example, I talked about conferences. You can't get people to submit to conferences if they're not in the industry in the first place. And I think there is the place of professional bodies like the AES to try and have influence where they can, whether that is in things like conferences or trade shows where you can, money talks. If you offer people monetarily incentives, do we think that would be appropriate? If we said you can have a free place at your trade show if you fill it with a woman, we can offer you different monetary tiers of sponsorship if you bring a diverse group of people. Is that enough for gear companies, for sponsors, or does it need to be, and arguably should it be that? Should it just be, we will give you a different monetary rate if you are diverse? They should also do it from, the good of their heart and for the moral reasons.
Going to be different categories of people, and of course there's overlap in gray areas, but they're going to be the people, like you said, who want to do better and need strategies to do so, or would benefit from some help. And then there are people who don't really care or don't really want to, and in that case applying pressure is just fine. And it's the way we have achieved change throughout history in this country and all over the world, right? Is at times you just have to apply pressure. And it makes me think of recently, maybe hopefully this analogy works for folks, but like the NFL made a statement about Black Lives Matter, just recently, like long after all the stuff that happened with Colin Kaepernick and everything. And some people's response was like, oh, this is, they don't mean it. It's just like they feel under pressure to just put something out there because other companies are doing it and it's going to hurt their bottom line. And my thought is, yes, exactly.
You're right. There's definitely the whole like peer pressure thing if everybody else is doing it. And if you get some, maybe there are some companies that would willingly jump on board and say, yeah, we're going to bring, if you ask us to bring diverse people, we'll bring diverse people. And then you'll get the other companies that need the push.
I guess one thing I was going to say is, it's one thing about thinking about tactics and strategies, but maybe we should also start talking about certain kinds of benchmarks about how do we realize that we've accomplished something that we were trying to do. And I think one marker would be when it no longer seems unusual at all that you would go to the AES trade floor and see a woman or a non-binary professional demoing a piece of gear. And you just assume that you see someone on that stage and that person is supposed to be there. And it's obvious that they should be demoing that piece of gear, or they should be demonstrating a particular technique and how to do a particular kind of trade. And we're not at that point yet.
I guess the fourth question that we have is how could, because we've heard from Mary about her experiences of mentorship and Daniel about his experiences as a mentor. How can men mentors help prepare young women and non-binary people to face gender discrimination challenges that they're likely to encounter within audio?
I've had a lot of really supportive, very generous male mentors in my career, and I'm very grateful for that. But honestly, it really made a difference to have a woman mentor because, I identified with her. She was like me. I saw her succeeding, and that kept me going. So I think male mentors are great. I just don't know that they completely understand the female experience, and at least research in business has indicated that they don't exactly understand.
I think an important part of being a mentor who is of a different group of people to your mentee is an awareness of that you don't necessarily have all the experience and that your experience is not necessarily directly applicable to your mentee, and whether that means that you then have to go and figure out, I don't think you as a mentor you should be asking your mentee for what you need to do in terms of relating to their experience. Others may obviously disagree with this. I think it's on the mentor to go and ask other people, do I need to be doing certain things in terms of being the best mentor that you can be?
I think also one thing that I found really helpful that my male mentors have done is providing opportunities for networking and being sort of facilitators in what become networking opportunities. I've found that to be very helpful from a personal perspective.
So what I interpret from that statement is kind of like if we have, what essentially is a boys' club that's been built up over a long period of time, if you have male mentors who are connected within that network, which until we change it is mostly men, that if they are willing to give you the keys and bring you in there, that's a way to sort of subvert that disproportionate representation.
I totally agree. That's exactly what I'm thinking about. Yeah.
As long as they then don't, throw you to the wolves and say, "I've connected you." Be in this world that is not necessarily the safe. If they then sort of, I guess, stand with you, and also like defend you if necessary, and the whole thing about a woman says something in a business meeting, everyone ignores it, and then a man then says the same thing and everybody listens. The sort of you bring your mentees into the network, but then help them within that network, because those spaces aren't necessarily the safest that they could be at the moment. And yes, we need to change that. But we need the keys to be able to get in the first place, as you say.
Yeah. And I think saying the truth to them too, right? Like the fact that it takes a lot of work on yourself to be able to survive in this industry, and that if they feel that it's too hard, they need help, and they can't just like expect it to happen by magic. I think it's one of the things I tell my female students a lot. It's just, if you want to stay here, like you need help, because emotionally it's really, really difficult, and don't feel ashamed about that. I wish somebody had told me that 15 years ago, actually.
You know, Amandine, it makes perfect sense, of course, that if you're mentoring someone, that you would tell them that, and also that you, as a young person, would appreciate hearing that honest acknowledgement. And then it also makes me think, for those, you know, for those of us that identify as men, that it's also important to do the same acknowledgement, to say, because if we don't, if I'm mentoring, say, a young woman, and I'm in a recording studio, and I don't acknowledge when I see that kind of stuff, it's almost like gaslighting. It's almost like, well, oh, well, does someone else, you know, maybe if you're their other mentor and they heard that from you, then I'm like, well, that's not real. It's just her experience. Even if I never say that, if I don't also honestly acknowledge that this is a system of oppression, that this is happening, that I see it too, even if I don't experience it the same way, your message isn't getting the support that it deserves.
Yeah. And that's something we got from the survey feedback. Some people emailed us and say, you know, I have kept thinking about those questions, and I realized I was not the only one. And I think that's important, because a lot of people will experience those microaggressions every day and think that's because of their personality, and because they're not doing it right, they don't have enough self-confidence, that's their problem. And I think it's important to just say the truth, and it's like, well, that's a fact. Like, as a minority, you experience this, and it makes you feel diminished, and you need to get some help to get your self-confidence back. So that, I think that is important, to have this discourse with younger professionals.